Welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking. This week I'm doing a small production run. I'm basically turning all these little blanks into saw handles on my CNC machine. And if you've ever done production runs on CNC machines, you know they're not something that you can kind of ignore. Not only do you have to swap out the mediums, but you have to just kind of pay attention in case anything goes wrong, a bit breaks or something like that. And in those situations, I also like to do a production on something on the lathe. Small items that I can turn the lathe off, I can walk away from for a little bit, and then I can go back to and finish up. So in this production run, I pulled out a bunch of old blanks that I had of turning blanks. A lot of times these were central cores. These weren't the money bowls out of a big log. And they've been sitting aside to drying. And in the past, I've done a video on going from a tree to a bowl in one day, which is green turning. I've also done some videos on making a 20-minute bowl in 20 minutes. This time, I thought throughout the week I would stop and show you little techniques I do when I'm finished turning a dried bowl, getting them ready for the market, and the different things that you can do with dried bowl blanks that you just can't do with green bowl blanks. So, come along. Well, let's work through this entire stack of bowl blanks. Now, I really do have a motley crew of variations here. Everything ranging from small boat arts to flat pecans. I got a mesquite. I got an old pear from, it looks like 2015. A lot of these are just stuff that got put back on the shelf and I actually kind of forgot about them. Even some that I never even did core out. We'll just see how they did. These got put under a shelf and I just forgot. They're wrapped in cellophane. They probably aren't dried, but we'll find out. Also, you got a lot of varieties of shapes. Flat ones, natural edge, kind of tall planter box styles, short flat plates. But the thing is, as wildly different as all these are, there are a few key aspects, a few key processes that you're going to go through on each and every one. And how you do them will affect the success of your final bowl, the shape, the finish, all that kind of stuff. Plus, along the ways, as we work through those, I'll talk about some design aspects. So, let's get going. Now, before we start working on the lathe, I want to talk about some principles before we get to this stuff, before you actually start drying it, how you harvest the wood. And I've talked about this kind of stuff in relation to the aesthetics of a bowl, getting the grain all lined up so it looks good and the customer can appreciate it. But it actually goes a few steps farther. So when you have a log and you're going to section up with your chainsaw to make bowl blanks, the general theory is you're going to get rid of the pit. Cut those out, and that will leave you your two bowl blanks. Notice that the grain is lined up evenly on both sides. Now that's not always possible going straight through the middle of the tree. Sometimes as wood turners we'll use like a big branch where the pit is offset. So at that time you actually have to adjust your cut on the chainsaw to figure out how best to balance out the grain, because that will look, it'll affect how it looks, but more importantly it will affect how it warps as it dries. And if you get something that warps really badly, putting it back on the lathe is almost a waste of your time, because you're going to turn away so much warpage that you won't have any bowl left. So, what's happening when a bowl warps is, as the wood dries out, general rule of thumb is the grain kind of wants to straighten out. So you will get these sections that look like that, little pie shapes as it goes on. But it also tends to elongate out. It turns more into a football shape so that the dried bowl blank looks more like that. And when we're gonna put it back on the lathe to return it, we're basically going to be getting rid of all that stuff. Now, if you had the grain slightly offset, that warpage just won't work because it'll kind of warp out like this sideways, and then you turn the bowl and all of a sudden that entire half is gone. Another thing, when you're remounting the board, getting that warpage controlled so it's even over the chuck will prevent a lot of headache. And the hardest part of remounting and retruing up your bowl is how you're going to get it on the chuck. Now I want to clarify something real quickly. A lot of people do turn bowls between centers, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, a lot of times if I'm doing small stuff, I'll do that too just because it's really, really quick. And it's more in the grain woodworking movement that they do that one. You know, with a spring pole lathe or a treadle lathe, because there's some reciprocating action that works out a little bit better. It's a little bit slower, and sometimes with those giant wooden contraptions, you don't have a way to mount a chuck. But most production woodworkers I know, or modern day woodworkers, we are going to use some kind of four-jaw chuck to secure our bowls. So that's the way I'm talking today. So let's go back over the lathe and talk about it. Getting that warped out bowl back in that chuck. And that's the first stage that you got to concentrate on. And it's going to be the same on all your bowls. You've got to get a way to retrue up whatever circles that you're using to anchor your bowl into your chuck, whether it being a recess or a tenon. Now I have a very generic shape pear bowl, and you can see it's kind of football-ish. It's a little taller than it is wide. The same thing happens here. It's a little bit longer this way than it is this way. And I've got to somehow get this on the lathe in such a manner to get it perfectly aligned. Any variation will be magnified throughout. What I mean by that one is, if for some reason I get not only this circle a little bit off this way or this way or this way or that way, or I get it tilt the shoulder that's going to fit on that lathe tilted one way or the other, that percentage of a degree will be magnified the farther out you go. And it could be that I just get a degree off, and all of a sudden that change means that my circle will be getting all of this side of the bowl but none of this side of the bowl, and you'll get it'll be worthless. So it's something that you really have to focus on. Now, I want to say about half of these were done by my dad, and you can see that the concentric circles, when you're roughing out a bowl, you don't bother finishing it. Just leave your tool marks, because that will tell you right where the center is. And you can take a scratch awl to actually dimple that spot. The problem I have is on the back, my dad didn't do that. He just knocked it off right there. So I've got to somewhat guess where that center point was and go here. Now from there you have a couple options. I know a lot of times I will just put my drive spur in those 2 points and my live center in here and turn it like that, and then just turn it round. And all you're talking about is this right here. We're not going to be touching anything else, just the tenon portion or the recess portion. Another thing I've done many times is just use the live center on the back side, take my tennis ball and squeeze it on that live center, because the tennis ball will want to distribute weight evenly, and you can kind of knock it around to get it balanced as it turns spindling, and just turn very, very slowly. But I'm doing some 30 of these bowls, all of them different, so I'm going to turn to a traditional, just a friction fit, where you have a piece of waste wood. You just lock it into your chuck, and then on each bowl you can somewhat shape this to fit whatever recess is down to here. And that'll give you a nice secure fit, and one circle will fit into another circle somewhat evenly, and then the tailstock will kind of balance everything out. So that's what I'm going to be doing, using this for all of those bowls, just to make the tenon or the recess perfectly round. Now something I like to do is put something in between the wood that I've got shaped slightly round, and I've got a little flat right here, so I know that the center point isn't going to be a pivot point. It's going to touch somewhere in here. And I also like to put a pad of something in there. It might be a washcloth, a roll of paper towels, or these foam sanding pads. Just get it somewhat centered so it's balanced. Drop your bowl right on there, and then make sure you hit your center mark with your light drive spur, and then cinch it up tight. That'll give you good friction. You are not going to be taking heavy cuts when you do this kind of setup, but light passes, fairly slow speed, it should be all okay. And when you're doing this, it's this shoulder right here that's going to fit right up against the chuck and give you all the stability you need. See, the chuck squeezes on this, but it's that shoulder that gives the stability and strength. Because if there's any gap between the shoulder and the edge of the chuck, your bowl could kind of rattle around. It just has to be locked in. And that right there is the angle that's going to translate all the way out to the edge of the bowl. So you need to get that really dead perfect. The problem is our bowl has warped. So if you spin it around, you can see it's going to kind of go back and forth. You just kind of have to kind of pick the spot where it's the average of it is going to be in lines. And with that little foam backing, you can sometimes tap your bowl to get it to move ever so slightly. And when you're happy that that's somewhat in plane as best as you can go, that's the time you turn it. Now, I can't emphasize enough, this is a very, very light cut. First, get your tenon dead round, or dovetail, depending on how you need to do it. And then clean up your shoulders. You want to get them flat all the way around. If anything, maybe dovetailed in ever so slightly. And that interior corner right there has to be a corner. There cannot be any roundness to it, because that's what's going to lock everything in. Seems like a small part for the overall effect, but if that is round right there, then your chuck can't get into that corner. It's going to be offset just a little bit, and you have a little bit of a gap right there, and that's very, very bad. So we've got it cut, not quite. I've got a little bit that's still untouched, so I need to reduce that shoulder a tad bit more. And this is a scraping cut that I'm using right now off the bottom wing. Green wood all the way around. Pop this one off. Let's go grab another one. I like to do all the same steps so I don't have to change my tool settings. So we got 30 of them to get through. So after you get all these tenons just dead square and nice shoulder set up on everything, it's time to turn to finding out how much of your bowl is left. And there are a few steps that I go through that I haven't heard too many people outline before, but it kind of gives me a guide work of what kind of design features I can add. because it's the dry bowls that allow you to do all your artistic feature. When you turn in green, you're pretty much left up to whatever the grain's going to do as to how good the bowl is going to look. Also, on recesses that you saw me do a few fast forward in the video, I don't use the spindle gouge or the bowl gouge. I actually scrape those, and I have one scraper that I made out of an offcut. It's got this cut in on the inside, and it's somewhat of a dovetail, and that's the perfect angle to fit my jaws. This is a one function tool, but you know, it's a Henry Taylor. It's not, wasn't going to use it for anything else. So just, I sharpen up every now and then, but all I do is get that perfect edge to fit my jaws whenever I do a recess. So I'm back to that original bowl pair. So notice that that shoulder is going to fit completely against the chuck all the way around. Any kind of air gap. Whoops, got a little bit of air gap right there. So let's see if it was a shoulder cut or me just pressing it in. Nope, didn't quite have it pressed all the way in. So get that secure before you do anything else. Now these next two steps that I do on pretty much every bowl are there so that you can see what kind of designs your particular bowl has. You first got to eliminate that warping, as I said. So the very first step I do at this stage is get this front section flat. So with a fresh edge, you're going to take some very light cuts just to clean up the end. And notice, I've got a bevel right here on my tool. I'm using that as my kind of direction. I kind of aim with that bevel because that's what's going to determine your straight line. If I bring it in so that the bevel is pointing towards the middle of the bowl, I will be going inside, or I'll get a lot of jagged cut as I'm forcing it to go straight along my tool rest. So I come in, it's fairly closed right now, meaning it's 90 degrees here. Just slightly open it up, engage the wood, and in a smooth path, just go work your way through. Notice that how as I get into the cut, I will slightly open my tool. Now you can see what's happening here. I'm coming in, and you see how much the bowl has warped. Coming down this way a little bit, which means that I probably, but this and this are really pretty close, so I probably got that shoulder angle close enough for here. But you can see how much of a difference the warpage takes. Right here, I'm halfway through the bowl. Right here, I'm barely touching the edge. I mean, it is quite a difference. So now we get our overall shape. That's as far deep as I can make the bowl and keep it even all the way around, which is what we're looking for when we're twice turning bowls. We want to get rid of that warpage and just make it as perfect as possible. Now, real quickly, I'm going to show you all the other bowls, and I want, just like in the first time, I want you to notice that all the tool movements, they're almost identical. So once you develop the pattern of whatever system that you're going to use to turn bowls, it can work not only more efficiently, but you're going to get better at the individual cuts just through sheer repetition, watching what's working, watching what doesn't work. So here we go. We're going to go walk through all the facing that, but understand that once I remount this bowl blank, I'm going to do all the steps to almost finishing it before I move on to the next bowl. The only thing I'm going to leave left to do is removing that tenon. just like setting the maximum size of our top by squaring it off, the next step is doing the same thing to the interior. I'm going to turn away just the warpage of this inside of the bowl to get my maximum width, or so to speak, or the inside diameter of my overall bowl. Now, when you're talking bowl designs, you can do anything you want with the rim, the outside, all that kind of stuff, but the interior, it just kind of has to be a gradual curve, either a consistent, decreasing, or increasing curve. Because spoons, hands, that kind of stuff, it's that smooth sensation that comes through. So at this stage, I'm just establishing what the bare minimum could be. I'm not looking for a finish. I'm not worrying about tear out. I'm just looking for the bare minimum of a gradual curve. I'm going to come back and redo the interior. But before I go to the exterior, I want to see how far in I can cut in with another curve, or how else I can do. It will give me a lot more freedom of movement on the outside if I can know what my minimums are on the inside. And more than likely, I will be coming back and matching this curve to get it as thin as possible based on whatever shape I do on the outside. So, real quickly, off of that freshly sharpened edge that we just did on the exterior, let's eliminate all the warpage and get some kind of smooth curve on the inside. Not worrying about depth or anything like that. So once again, I've got my bevel. I'm going to use that to point my direction that I want to go with the inside. Initially, I want to come in. I'm just going to go, it's not quite dead straight going perpendicular to the chuck. It's kind of an angle on this particular bowl. So I'm just going to enter the wood in a slightly closed position. As I get bit in and my bevel is starting to rub on the edge, I can open it up to get a smoother and more efficient cut. And you are going to be turning air quite a bit. See what's happening? We're touching on the outside, skipping. Ooh, this was quite a bit off on the other side. Either that or it warped differently from one side of the bowl to the other. But, gonna make progression, and I do find it easier if I bring my tool rest inside. But I like to make that first cut with it perpendicular just to see where the warpage is gonna be. There we go. That's good enough for me. I'm not going to worry about this because that's the depth, and really I don't do much design work at the bottom of a bowl. It's all inside where the foot is. And the foot of this one's right about there on the outside. Here we are. We've done my 3 stages that I do on pretty much every single twice or thrice turn bowl. I reset the flat spot so it will anchor into the chuck, and I made sure to get it as close as I could to perpendicular so it wasn't too far off here. I then square off the top, getting rid of all warpage possible so that I can see the absolute sizing I'm working with. And then I will begin hollowing out the interior to see what kind of dimensions I also had to work with as far as thickness. It's at this point in time that you get to start being creative, figuring out what you want to happen with this bowl, because now that it's dry, it's not moving. You can actually have variations in thicknesses without worrying about it cracking or anything like that. Whereas if it was a straight green bowl, let me pull one out. Like this was semi-green, and you can see it is slightly warped along the grain because it was still drying, a little bit oblong. But this right here is pretty much my favorite, as basic a design as I like. When you take away all elements, this is the shape I like. I like sharp edges. I like curves. I don't like flats at all. I like graduating curves. That tells the buyer that it's not machine made, because machines generally do very consistent curves. I like the interior to have a different curve than the exterior. I am about 3/8 of an inch right here, but it will actually get down to about 1/4 of an inch inside and then transition. And it's a little thick on bottom because I like the weight of that. This is my foundation design that I prefer to go for. But when I'm doing hardwood bowls, because I am now allowed to have variations in thicknesses, I will allow myself one design element per bowl. Any more than that, my personal opinion, it gets kind of busy. Now that doesn't mean to say I won't carve the entire exterior of that one, but I will do it in a consistent theme, so that is just one element. I might add a bead. I might do this lip differently. But the other portions of the bowl are going to be very consistent, and the interior is always going to be as smooth and graduated as I can possibly make it. So for the rest of this video, I'm just going to be playing around with each one of those design elements. And I might pull a few of the bowls out and show you how I do them and the reasons why, understanding I have no training in actually design theories and stuff like that. This is just stuff I've picked up that's worked for me. So if you'd like to see the bowls I produce, please consider visiting my website, wortheffort.com. Pretty much all these bowls I will try to have on that website available for sale before this video goes live. Some might be a little bit after, depending upon how the finishing dries on them. And all those sales really do help support me producing videos like this for you. I also have other stuff available for sale there too. For instance, swag, like my t-shirts and stuff. But for the rest of y'all, if you want to stick around, let's start having some fun. Now, unfortunately, on this original pear bowl, I was setting it up to get a really nice edge treatment right here. The curvature goes straight in here, and it converges about 1.5 inches down to about 1/4 inch right there, where you can see that's a whole fingernail. So I could have been doing a whole bunch of something right here to make it look cool. But because I'm only going to do one element per bowl, on my last pass smoothing it out, I came across this bark inclusion. And I do have a crack on the outside here, but it's not in line with that. The crack over is, that right there goes all the way through. So instead of doing any kind of fancy treatment right here, I'm going to do a brass inlay into this fill. Mainly I'm choosing brass this time instead of something like turquoise, is because pear is a very light color, and brass is somewhat lighter colored than maybe turquoise or lead or black epoxy or anything. So I think the offset of the outside of the bark inclusion, the bark, and the turquoise on the inside, it'll look nicer. So I'm choosing brass this time. But the same technique can be used with turquoise or aluminum or anything like that. So I'm going to take this off the lathe, leaving it on the chuck. I do have a second chuck, so I can continue on while it's drying, and I'll show you how to do the inlay. Okay, I lost the filming on the outside. I forgot to turn the camera on. So what I basically did was I put a block of wood over there to get it so that the crack was somewhat level with the ground, and I used a little powder. So because you didn't see how I did it on the outside, I'm going to flip it over while that's drying and do this inside crack. And the idea is you want to use a little bit of powder and just get that into the crack. Warning, if you ever do use metal powders or turquoise, but especially with metal, you want to wash your hands immediately after using it, because if any of this gets into your eye, I mean, it can be just devastating. And just spread it around, let it fill up the cracks. And I kind of like to pile it above the cracks a little bit just in case it settles. Give it a few taps. And then I've got very thin CA. And all I'm going to do is drizzle a few drops, not much, right on top of the cracks. And this will kind of bind all the metal fibers together. You don't want to just flood it, just drizzle a few drops. It'll soak in and solidify everything. Now if I have a lot of glumps and stuff like that caused by piling, I will actually scrape or turn it first, and then it's just a matter of sanding as normal. Though I do suggest that you throw away the sandpaper after you use it, for the simple reason that it's going to be impregnated with that brass, and you don't want to transfer that to another piece of work. So let's see what it looks like. Nice and filled in pretty easily. I'll squirt some alcohol on it so you can see what it's going to look like with the finish. Oh yeah, that'll be pretty nice. So since this bowl has that brass inlay on it, I didn't feel it was appropriate to do anything else. So on this time I did a slight curve on top and a consistent diminishing curve on the outside, and that's my bowl. So a quick little application of some sanding sealer, a little bit of shellac, and let's see what it turns out looking like with all that with the brass inlay. There we go. Nice little glint of brass. So right here I have a nicely colored pecan bowl. And there are two kind of design things I want to talk about here. The one design element I want to play with is this lip right there. That's going to be my one design thing. The overall bowl shape is a slight ogee right here, and the interior curve comes in right to this bottom of this lip, which will give me my design element to play with, and then the interior curve matches this curve but not the bottom ogee, which becomes a foot. So you have a very nice transition, so when people feel it, they're going to feel that match, and then the curve smooths out right here. But I want to give them something to feel here that's just kind of cool. Now I'm going to talk about two design theories that I've kind of adopted. One I got from Cindy Drozda on finial designs, and I've applied it to things like bowls and boxes and stuff, and it just seems to work. It's the idea that you're allowed to repeat elements of a design. You're allowed to repeat themes in a design, but you're not allowed to repeat dimensions. And right now, this little lip is about equal this way as it is this way, and it just doesn't look right to me. Now, I'll admit, this could be because I kind of think of that philosophy and I've kind of convinced myself it doesn't look right. Everybody's going to be different. This is just something I've adopted. I've also adopted an idea of whole ratios as a lot of my measurements. I really don't care about overall distances here and here, but dimensions, ratios, kind of work for me. And a lot of times on something like this, a 2/3 dimension seems to work well. So if I divide this up in 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I come down here and just do 2 of those, I can take off a little bit of this and maybe add a transition into that curve, and I think the overall lip will look a little bit better. So let's do that one, and you decide. I maintain my crisp line. I've got a slightly concave curve right here, but now I've still got this flat right here. So going off the same idea that this is 2 and that is 3, I'm going to divide this and add a bead on the front. So right at about the 1/3 mark, come in, and then come in this way, round it over to the bottom, and then scrape a curve into it. So I get the nice crisp line at the bottom that I want, and the rest I'll handle with sandpaper. Blend that in right there. Finish the round over. Just do not take away that line at the base, because that shows the customer the nice crisp edge. But on a bead you don't want a line. So I end up with a nice transition to shadow line. There's a little bit of an accent there. That's just the one detail I have. And the proportions, when you feel it and you look at it, it's kind of a 2:3 ratio all the way around. And that's kind of offset by the OG, which is basically 3 different curves matched up. 2:3. So right here I have somewhat of a shallow bowl. It goes in fairly straight right here and meets up with this curve right there. So I have a concave, a convex, and then another concave to the foot where this interior curve meets that concave. And I left this nice and flat from whenever I did it at the beginning, and I've got this slightly rounded over. So I'm going to call this my accent piece, but because basically this is just a shallow bowl design with a rim. And I'm going to do some seared carving in here. But there's a general idea that whenever you have a kind of rim like that, you want it to curve slightly to the outside on the back quarter or back third, and then fall into the inside, because it gives a nice feel to people's thumbs when they're holding it. And if you've ever done a show, you hand a bowl like this to somebody, almost instantly the thumbs are going to do that one. So this right here is really important, and I'm going to be adding some carving and decorative texture to it, but I want to keep somewhat of that feel to it. So my first thing is to define the shape that's going to be carved, but I'm not going to touch this outside or inside. I'm going to get to that in a second, and you'll see why. So just come in kind of an equal distance on both sides. And go a little bit deeper on this side. And then I'm going to slightly shape this interior portion. That 2/3. And I always have a problem with this side because my tool handle hits my bed rails, so sometimes I'm just going to scrape it. Keeps my tool handle off the bed rail. So I've now got a high point of this curve, and it dives down a little bit deeper on this side than that side. And I'm going to take my coarsest sandpaper I got, which I believe is 120, and just rough sand it. Just to eliminate any, I guess, tool marks, for lack of a better word, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now I have a nice place to carve. Now when I say carve, what I really mean is a silly little V-gouge in my mallet. I'm not doing anything special. But if I go from one side to the other and do somewhat the same shape on each side, if I keep going at that, doing a different shape even every time I rotate it, well, I end up with a pattern. That's kind of what I'm wanting here. Just an abstract pattern. What's cool is the flame will actually dance over the top of the carving. So it's only going to burn the recess. You just want to be careful not to burn the inside if you can. Now, because we earlier shaped this interior portion right here, it is now below these 2 points. So I can now continue that curve on, so I'll get a nice shadow line, but that won't be burnt, and I can bring this back a little bit on this side to blend in on this little bit large rim right now. Now when you sand the rest of it, you just want to make sure you do not hit the burn part. Now I've still got to finish the rest of this bowl, but just to give you an idea what it's going to look like, you do want to put some kind of sealant on top of the singe part so that the ash doesn't blend anywhere else. So I'm going to put a light coat of shellac over that, and you can see the result. And that should seal it in, so as soon as that dry, you're not going to get this black stuff on your skin or anything else. And then the oils, the wax and stuff like that will further seal it. Well, I'm going to call this video here. Three bowls showing you elements. Yeah, it's taken longer than I thought, and I don't want this video to drag out forever. But if you're interested in these kind of 1 element per bowl tips, leave a comment below. I might go ahead and film something on each one of these, and if there's any interest, I'll put it together into another long video on just those aspects. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you got something out of it. If you did, please like, favorite, subscribe, do all those social medias, tell your friends. Word of mouth advertising is the best that we can get for this Worth the Effort channel. And as remember, these will be up on my online store as soon as this video goes up. And all these other ones will go up in the next few days. And I want you to remember one last thing. That it is always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Y'all be safe and have fun.